This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. I'm Graham Stanley, and today is Wednesday, the 3rd of September 2025. And I'll be looking at something that has been called the Reading Wars today.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So, welcome to the Late Late Show, everyone. As I mentioned, I'll be looking at something that has become known as the Reading Wars today. Reading, it's something that most of us who have learned how to read at an early age tend to take for granted. How did you learn to read? And how does it happen? What does it take to learn how to read? Well, learning to read is the acquisition and practice of the skills necessary to understand the meaning behind printed words. And for most of us, if you're a skilled reader, the act of reading feels simple, effortless, and automatic. But the process of learning to read is complex and builds on cognitive, linguistic, and social skills developed from a very early age. It's one of the 4 core language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And reading is vital if someone is to have a command of written language. What about the Reading Wars? What's that all about? Well, the Reading Wars refers to long-standing debates, mainly in English-speaking countries, over the best way to teach children how to read. And the term captures the conflict between 2 broad approaches. One, phonics or code-based instruction, which focuses on teaching children the systematic relationship between letters and sounds. It emphasizes explicit instruction in decoding words, sounding out unfamiliar words, and gradually building fluency that way. And it's supported by cognitive science and research on how the brain learns to read to a large extent. And then we have the whole language or meaning-based instruction approach, which emphasizes reading for meaning and enjoyment, with the belief that children learn to read naturally, much like they learn to speak. This relies on exposure to rich literature, context cues, i.e. pictures, sentence structure, meaning, and children's own writing. And this approach downplays or rejects systematic phonics, assuming decoding skills will develop incidentally. Then there's something in between, balanced literacy, an attempt at middle ground, and this emerged as a compromise, combining elements of both, using phonics when needed, but still prioritizing authentic reading and writing experiences. In practice, some critics argue it has often leaned towards whole language, offering only fragmented or incidental phonics instruction, this balanced literacy approach. So, in summary, the Reading Wars are essentially a clash between explicit skills-based instruction, otherwise known as phonics, and implicit meaning-based immersion, whole language, with balanced literacy representing a contested middle path. What's at stake is not only teaching practices, but also educational policy, teacher training, and children's literacy outcomes. Which of these do you think is best? come and join me. I don't have a guest today, so I'd love to have you come and take part in the program. If you are listening live and would like to do so, please go to ttr.org to find out more about how to do that, or reach out on social media to me, and we can get you in the studio and you can take part of the program and you can say what you think about all of this, the reading wars, etc. If you're listening to the recording, if you would like to take part in a future program, then please do get in touch. I would love to have more guests. Otherwise, stick around to find out more. But first, the Teachers Talk Radio News.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week says that the handover of the administration of teachers' pensions to a new provider has been delayed until next summer. Capita has run the teachers' pension scheme for almost 3 decades, but was due to hand it over to Indian IT firm TCS in October of this year. Capita missed out on the £233 million 10-year contract when governments re-tendered in 2023. However, the Department for Education has now confirmed that the final handover has been pushed back to summer 2026. A spokesperson did not explain the reason for the delay, nor give further details, but did state it was vital that after almost 30 years of running the teachers' pension scheme, Capita's handover to Tata Consultancy Services is a smooth one. The spokesperson went on to say that the change of date will not impact any pensions or benefit entitlements. TCS and Capita were approached for comment but have not yet responded. FE Week reports that Ellen Thinnison, who is Chief Executive of North East College Group, has been appointed as the next FE Commissioner. Thinnison currently heads up Education Partnership North East, but will succeed Sheila Legrave from January 2026. Legrave has held the post of FE Commissioner since 2021 and was due to end her tenure in October, but will remain in post while Thinnison serves out her notice. Thinnison told FE Week, "It's a great privilege to be appointed at this crucial time when skills are vital to delivering the government's mission for growth and opportunity." Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said, "I am delighted to appoint Ellen to the vital role of FE Commissioner." Phillipson also thanked Sheila Legrave for her work in the role. The FE Commissioner role was introduced in 2013 as a key advisor to ministers in the Department for Education. The Commissioner intervenes in struggling colleges, where visits turn into published reports which assesses quality and financial health, as well as the existing governance and leadership. The 4-day week role comes with £140,000 a year salary and is a 3-year term. The TES covers a poll which suggests that almost one half of teachers fear looking like cheats when using artificial intelligence in the classroom. The survey by YouGov says 44% feel they are not doing their job properly when using AI for core teaching tasks. The results come after the Department for Education released guidance for schools on using AI, which it said can cut teachers' workload. The government has pledged to invest an extra £1 million to accelerate the development of AI tools to help teachers with marking and generate detailed, tailored feedback for individual students. The survey suggests that 52% of schools now officially adopted AI, a rise from 31% in 2024. In the survey, teachers expressed concerns about feeling intimidated by students' superior AI knowledge and were worried about the growing gap between students' AI abilities and their own. However, the survey also found that many of those who reported using AI said they felt less stressed as a result. Almost one half of teachers reported they had received no support with AI from their schools. More details and statistics can be found online in the TES magazine. Schools Week reports that the government's holidays, activities and food programme has been extended for another 3 years, with £600 million of funding being awarded. The scheme was piloted between 2018 and 2020 and rolled out nationwide in 2021. And it pays for free clubs and lunches for poorer pupils during school holidays. The DFE has said it will run until at least March 2029. And Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said, "Giving every child the best start in life is my number one priority." Councils have welcomed the announcement. More details on Schools Week online. Finally, the BBC reports that in the USA, the FBI is investigating a wave of active shooter hoaxes at US universities, which have triggered chaotic armed police responses as students return to campus for the new semester. Since the start of the new school year, nearly a dozen universities have been hit by swatting hoaxes, leading to panic as students, parents and faculty flee. In a statement issued in response to the latest wave of hoaxes, the FBI encouraged the public to remain vigilant and immediately report anything they consider suspicious. Last year, a British man became the first in the UK to be charged with committing a swatting hoax after police in the state of Maryland responded to a fake hostage call and shot the victim of the hoax with plastic bullets. The FBI reports that several young men have now been jailed for calling in such hoaxes. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back, everyone. If you're listening live and would like to call in, I'd love to hear from you. Come and join me in the studio at Teachers Talk Radio and I can bring you in to the conversation. To find out more, go to ttr.org. So, I've been starting to talk about the reading wars, and I can't remember when I first came across the term, but I knew at some point that I wanted to know more. So here we are. I've done some research for the show so I could better understand what it was all about, and this is what I have found out. So here's a timeline of the reading wars showing how the debate has shifted over the years. And I have to say, it seems that the debate has mainly taken place in the US, but there have been parallels in the UK and Australia that I know of, and I'm sure in other places this has been discussed and debated too. Do you know what the situation is where you are? Please come and join me. Or if you can think of anything I should know to add to the program, please do so. Now, let's start way back when. In the 19th century, what was the situation as far as reading instruction? Well, it seems that reading instruction back in the 19th century typically focused on teaching the alphabet, sounds, and word decoding through spelling and drill methods. So definitely a phonics type of tradition. And back in 1870, the year Charles Dickens dies, the Education Act was passed in the UK. And this 1870 Education Act stands as the very first piece of legislation to deal specifically with the provision of education in England and Wales. More than anything else, it demonstrated a commitment to provision on a national scale for the first time. And this act established a system of school boards to build and manage schools in areas where they were needed. The boards were locally elected bodies which drew their funding from the local rates. Soon after, the 1876 Royal Commission on the Factory Acts recommended that education be made compulsory in order to stop child labour. And in 1880, a further Education Act finally made school attendance compulsory between the ages of 5 and 10, which was then in 1893 extended to the age of 11 and 1899 to 12. But what has this got to do with Dickens? What has this got to do with reading? Well, back to Dickens, who made the problem of illiteracy a major theme in his fiction. Many of his characters are semi-literate, while others have no reading ability at all. In Bleak House, Joe the crossing sweeper is one of Dickens' completely illiterate characters, and his inability to decipher the signs that saturate the city in which he lives makes him especially vulnerable to being exploited. Now, when Dickens' non-reading characters get the chance to correct their disadvantage, they often take it. In Our Mutual Friend, the illiterate servant Mr. Boffin suddenly becomes wealthy and swiftly hires someone to teach him how to read. Apart from anything else, many got their first taste of fiction, of reading fiction from Dickens, and many more still do so thanks to him. Jonathan Rose, a historian of reading, has documented in his 2001 book, The Intellectual Life of the British Working Classes, that Dickens was definitely the most popular author in working class communities, and many started to read thanks to him. Fast forward to the early to mid 20th century, and there we have the rise of something that was called look-say or whole word approaches to reading. And the look and say method of teaching reading links whole words with their meanings without breaking them down into sounds first. It treats the meaning of the word and how it can be used in different contexts as the most important thing. And children are encouraged to remember the shape and look of the word so that they recognize it when they see it again. So it relies on the children's visual memory. When a teacher only uses this method, the child may become lost if they do not recognize the words. And because of this, the phonics method became popular later again. So the look-say approach was popularized in the US by reading primers like the Dick and Jane books. Dick and Jane made their debut in 1930, accompanied by a guide for teachers to help them adopt the whole word approach in their classrooms. The series was heavily illustrated with pictures designed to help new readers associate words with their meanings. And so popular was this approach that those readers lasted until the 1950s. It wasn't until 1955 with the publication of Why Johnny Can't Read by Rudolf Fleisch that the argument was put forward that the whole word method did not properly teach children how to read or how to appreciate literature because it was too simplistic and the limited vocabulary caused problems. And in the 1960s, this was when the call first came for books that focused more on phonics. In the 1960s and 70s, this whole language movement emerged, and this was inspired by progressive education and linguistics with an emphasis on natural learning, authentic texts, and meaning making. And this also de-emphasized phonics, arguing children learn best through immersion in rich literature. The whole language method became a major model for education in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK in the 1980s and 1990s, despite there being no scientific support for the method's effectiveness. And it is based on the premise that learning to read in English comes naturally to humans, learning to read comes naturally. I guess the focus on English because they were English-speaking countries, especially young children, in the same way that learning to speak develops naturally. Then in the 1980s and 1990s, this is where you really get the reading wars starting to intensify. Whole language becomes official policy in many districts in the US and in lots of teacher training programs elsewhere. And phonics advocates argue this disadvantages struggling readers. The media at the time framed the debate as a war between phonics versus whole language, and I think this is where the term the reading wars comes from. And research in cognitive science started to strengthen the case for systematic phonics. In the US Congress, for example, a commissioned reading expert, Marilyn Jaeger Adams, wrote a definitive book on the topic around this time. This was around 1994. And she determined that phonics was important, but also suggested that some elements of the whole language approach were helpful. That book was called Beginning to Read, Thinking and Learning About Print. Then we have, in the year 2000, there was a national reading panel in the US commissioned by the US Congress, which was essentially a very exhaustive review of the research into reading. The panel concluded that systematic phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension strategies were essential. So the panel found that phonics instruction of varying kinds, especially analytic and synthetic phonics, contributed positively to students' ability to read words on tests of reading words in isolation. And they also found that embedded phonics and no phonics contributed to lower rates of achievement for most students when measured on tests of reading words in isolation. The panel recommended, therefore, an approach it described as scientifically based reading research, SBRR, which cited 5 elements essential to effective reading instruction: explicit systematic phonics instruction, phonological awareness, reading comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency. Then we have, in the 2000s, something that became the dominant compromise, which was called balanced literacy. And this combined literature-rich environments with some phonics. So balanced literacy is a theory of teaching reading and writing when it comes to the English language that has a variety of interpretations. For some, balanced literacy strikes a balance between whole language and phonics, which was meant to put an end to these so-called reading wars, whereas others have said that balanced literacy in practice usually means the whole language approach to reading, so not so balanced. Some say it uses research-based elements of comprehension, vocabulary fluency, phonemic awareness, and phonics, and includes instruction in a combination of the whole group, small group, and one-to-one instruction in reading, writing, speaking, and listening, with the strongest research-based elements of each. During balanced literacy reading workshops, skills are explicitly modeled by the teacher during something called mini lessons, and the teacher chooses a skill and strategy that the class needs to be taught based on assessments conducted in the classroom. The teacher announces the teaching point or the skill and strategy and shows students how to accomplish the skill by modeling the strategy in a book the students are familiar with. The teacher likewise uses a think aloud in this method to share thoughts and then allow the students to work this out during an active engagement phase. What about phonics? Well, in practice in the 2000s, in schools, phonics was often taught incidentally by many teachers rather than systematically. Then we come to the 2010s, where there was a pushback against balanced literacy. Why? Well, research had shown that many students, especially struggling readers, English learners, and those with dyslexia, have been left behind. So, what happened? the science of reading movement started to grow, and this advocated evidence-based phonics first instruction. And this science of reading draws on many fields, including cognitive science, developmental psychology, education and educational psychology, special education, and others. Foundational skills such as phonics, decoding, and phonemic awareness were or are considered to be important parts of the science of reading, but the science of reading also includes other areas such as oral reading fluency, vocabulary, morphology, reading comprehension, text, spelling and pronunciation, thinking strategies, oral language proficiency, working memory training, and written language performance. There's quite a lot to this, isn't there? Despite the increase in understanding and evidence of what works, reading levels still remained low. Why was this? Well, some pointed to the fact that contemporary reading science had very little impact on actual educational practice. And this is the thing, isn't it? The gap between research and policy and actually what happens in classrooms everywhere, which continues to be something that is problematic for a lot of people, or for a lot of countries and a lot of teaching contexts. And this is mainly because of the two cultures problem separating science and education, according to the research. So current teaching practice also was pointed out that this rested on outdated, in many cases rested on outdated assumptions that made learning to read harder than it actually needed to be. So what has happened subsequently? In the 2020s, there have been some policy shifts. For example, in some US states, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Ohio in particular, they have mandated phonics-based curricula and are retraining teachers. In the UK, since 2006, systematic synthetic phonics has been required in primary schools with measurable improvements in reading outcomes. And Australia introduced a national inquiry in 2023 pushing phonics over whole language. There are lots of other theories. We don't really have time for them today, but one theory that rings true to me that I read about earlier today was this simple view of reading. Now, according to this scientific theory of reading, in order to comprehend what they're reading, students need both decoding skills and oral language, listening, in other words, comprehension ability. Neither is enough on their own. So in other words, they need the ability to recognize and process text and the ability to understand the language in which the text is written, i.e. vocabulary, grammar, and background knowledge. And students are not reading if they can decode words, but do not understand their meaning. Similarly, students are not reading if they cannot decode words that they would ordinarily recognize and understand if they heard them spoken out loud. So this brings us up to date with that very brief overview. You are listening to Teacher Talk Radio. I've been talking about the reading wars and what they mean for education learners and teachers. I have no guest today, so if you would like to come and join me, if you're listening live, to discuss reading and what you think about all of this, then I'd love to hear from you. Go to ttr.org to find out how to join me. So, I've talked about the reading wars in general education, but what about English language teaching, English for speakers of other languages? How has this affected the approach to reading in this context? Well, when it comes to phonics and English for speakers of other languages, the systematic phonics does help ESOL learners decode unfamiliar words, even when vocabulary is unknown. And it provides access to the alphabetic principle essential for children from non-alphabetic L1 backgrounds. In other words, L1 meaning their original language, for example, Chinese and Arabic. There are limitations, however. Decoding alone isn't enough, as was mentioned earlier, and ESOL learners may pronounce words correctly but not really understand them due to the limited knowledge of vocabulary. And this overemphasis on phonics overemphasis on phonics definitely risks neglecting the oral language development, comprehension, background knowledge of the students. When it comes to whole language and ESOL, the benefits are this idea of the whole language's focus on meaning, context, and rich texts, which support vocabulary growth and exposure to natural English in this context. And it encourages the integration of speaking, listening, and cultural contexts, which are crucial for learners of English as a second or other language. The limitations, of course, are that without strong phonics support, ESOL learners may struggle to decode words that they don't recognize by sight, and there is a heavy reliance on cueing, in other words, guessing from pictures or context, which can disadvantage learners who lack the cultural or linguistic knowledge to use these cues effectively. Then there's the balanced literacy and ESOL learners, and many ESOL programs have adopted this balanced literacy approach, hoping to combine a combination of code and meaning. And in practice, we know that phonics is not enough, and ESOL learners, especially older children entering English medium schools, could fall behind in both decoding and comprehension if there's just an approach to one. When it comes to the science of reading and ESOL, which tends to be the current direction, the research now emphasizes that these learners need explicit phonics instruction and rich language input. And this is an effective approach in general, which combines systematic phonics to crack the code, to help students crack the code, oral language development through listening and speaking, vocabulary building, especially academic and subject-specific language, and comprehension strategies and background knowledge building. So, in policy terms, there are some countries that are now explicitly aligning their literacy teaching with the science of reading framework, but also stressing that these learners require additional support in oral language and vocabulary. To sum up then, phonics can help ESOL learners decode, but it doesn't ensure comprehension. And whole language, which can boost meaning and vocabulary, can also there's a risk that it leaves decoding gaps. So balanced literacy, which tries to bridge the gap but often fails in practice. And then we have the science of reading, and the current consensus is that learners both need systematic phonics and rich oral language vocabulary support integrated together. So what has happened in practice is it seems that these reading wars are still going on in a way. It seems to be swinging one way, and then after research is developed, swings another way. And so it's kind of interesting, an interesting outcome, really. So I am now going to have a short break, and then I'm going to introduce you to a debate. No, we'll go straight to the debate. Go straight to the debate on what the approaches to reading are. So let's get on with that. Now it's time for our discussion, our debate. And as I mentioned before, there are three guests who will be giving different points of view about this topic. First up is Kath, a literacy researcher and advocate of phonics and the science of reading. Kath, can you tell us why you believe systematic phonics should be the foundation of reading instruction?
Thank you for inviting me. Let me begin with something simple but profound. Learning to read is not natural. Unlike spoken language, which humans acquire almost effortlessly, reading requires the brain to build new connections, linking the visual system for recognizing letters with the auditory system for sounds, and then mapping these onto meaning. That's why systematic phonics is so essential. It provides children with the code, the alphabetic principle, that allows them to translate marks on a page into sounds and then into words. Without that, reading becomes guesswork. And guesswork is inefficient, unreliable, and deeply unfair to children who don't already have strong oral language or who struggle to memorize words. We've seen this time and again in the research. When phonics is taught systematically, children of all backgrounds, including those from disadvantaged homes, make faster progress. And this isn't about joyless drilling. Phonics lessons can be lively, engaging, full of games and songs. But the bottom line is, it gives children the keys to the written language. Now, does that mean comprehension and vocabulary don't matter? Of course not. Reading is about making meaning. But my argument is that you can't build comprehension until you can actually access the words on the page. Decoding is the gateway. When it comes to learners whose first language isn't English, the stakes are even higher. Imagine a child who knows no English. If we don't give them the code, they'll be doubly disadvantaged. They won't be able to decode and they'll struggle with comprehension. With phonics, at least they can start sounding out words, and from there we can build vocabulary, oral language, and cultural knowledge. So my position is this: systematic phonics is the non-negotiable foundation of reading. It's not the whole house, but without it, the house has no doorway.
Thank you, Kath. You've made a powerful case for phonics as the key that unlocks the code of written English, but of course not everyone agrees that phonics should dominate reading instruction. Our second guest, Damien, is a teacher and literacy trainer who supports what's often called balanced literacy.
Thanks very much.
Damien, how do you see things?
I think it's important to begin by saying I'm not against phonics. Of course, children need to understand how sounds map to letters. But the real question is, how much emphasis should we place on phonics? And how do we balance it with the broader purposes of reading? What worries me about a strictly phonics first agenda is that it can narrow reading to a technical exercise. Children may learn to decode, yes, but do they enjoy reading? Do they see it as meaningful? Do they use it to explore ideas, to connect with their own lives, to imagine other worlds? Those are equally important outcomes. That's why I support a balanced approach. Phonics should be taught, but alongside authentic reading and writing experiences. Children should read whole books, not just decontextualized word lists. They should be encouraged to write creatively, not just spell phonetically. They should encounter poetry, stories, factual texts, things that motivate them to persist. And let's remember that children bring knowledge with them. They learn through talk, through social interaction, through making sense of language in context. That's why strategies like using meaning cues, picture cues, and syntax can be helpful. They reflect the reality of how readers process text. For English learners, this balanced approach is especially important. These children need phonics, yes, but they also need rich language environments. They need to see English used in real contexts. They need to feel that their own identities and languages are valued, not erased. If we reduce reading to phonics drills, we risk alienating them and limiting their exposure to the richness of English. So my view is this: phonics has its place, but it's not sufficient. Balanced literacy, done well, offers children both the tools and the motivation to become lifelong readers. And in the end, isn't that what we want?
Thanks, Damien. So for you, reading is not just about cracking the code, it's also about building motivation, context, and meaning from the very start. Finally, we're joined by Val, an ESOL specialist who works with children learning English as an additional language.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join this conversation.
Val, your perspective is crucial here. How does this debate look from your field?
My starting point is this. For learners of English as another language, learning to read in English is not just about decoding symbols on a page. It's about acquiring a new language system with new vocabulary, grammar, and cultural references. That makes their journey quite different from that of a monolingual English-speaking child. Now, phonics is very important. It helps English learners unlock print. They can learn that PH can make an F sound even if it doesn't in their first language. That's empowering. But phonics alone will not enable them to understand. Take the sentence, "The cat is on the mat." A child might sound that out perfectly, but still have no idea what a mat is. They need explicit vocabulary instruction, lots of oral language practice, and opportunities to connect words to real-life experiences. Equally, while whole language approaches can offer rich exposure, we can't assume English learners will pick things up incidentally. Context clues don't always work if you don't have the background knowledge. Imagine trying to guess squirrel from a storybook illustration if you've never seen one in your country. It's almost impossible. So my argument is that English learners need both code and meaning, but also more. They need deliberate vocabulary teaching, scaffolding of comprehension, and a recognition that their linguistic and cultural backgrounds matter. Reading instruction must integrate oral language, background knowledge, and cultural relevance. In other words, English learners highlight why the reading wars are a false dichotomy. It's not phonics or whole language. It's about weaving them together and adding layers that specifically support multilingual learners.
Thank you, Val. That really brings home how complex this issue becomes when we think about children learning English as a second or additional language. So we've heard three very different starting points. Kath argues phonics is the essential foundation. Damien stresses the importance of balancing phonics with rich, meaningful literacy experience. And Val reminds us that for ESOL learners, neither side alone is enough. These children need tailored support that weaves both code and meaning together. In the next part of our discussion, we'll open it up. Where do these views converge? Where do they clash? And crucially, what should teachers actually do in classrooms today? So now that we've heard your opening thoughts, let's open it up. I want to start with you, Kath. Critics often say phonics-heavy approaches risk being too mechanical, leaving children able to sound out words but not necessarily understand them. What is your response to that?
That's a common misconception. Systematic phonics is not about drilling children without meaning. It's about giving them the tools to access text. Once they can decode, comprehension becomes possible. If a child can't lift the words off the page, they can't enjoy the story. I'd argue that phonics frees them to engage with meaning.
Damien, you've been nodding, but I suspect you have a slightly different view.
Yes, I do. I agree decoding is essential, but where I part company is the idea that we must master decoding before meaning comes in. Children learn best when they want to read. If we immerse them in engaging stories in texts that matter to them, they'll be motivated to work out the code. I worry that if we put phonics first and everything else second, we risk killing that motivation early.
But Damien, we have decades of evidence showing that children who don't get explicit phonics struggle long term. Motivation is wonderful, but motivation alone doesn't teach a child that PH makes an F sound. We can't leave that to chance.
I'm not saying we should. I'm saying phonics should be part of the diet, not the only thing on the plate. Literacy is about meaning making as much as mechanics.
Val, let's bring you in here. How does that tension look when you're talking about ESOL learners?
Honestly, both of you are right, and both approaches can be problematic if applied rigidly. English learners often have strong literacy skills in their first language. They may already understand how writing systems work, but they lack English vocabulary. So while phonics helps them decode, it doesn't help if they don't know what the words mean. On the flip side, throwing them into rich English texts without explicit support can overwhelm them. They need both decoding and lots of scaffolding for meaning.
So it sounds like a hybrid model, or at least something more nuanced, is necessary for ESOL learners?
Exactly. I often say, think of phonics as giving them the keys and whole language as showing them the rooms inside the house. If you give them only the keys, they're standing outside a house they can't enter. If you only show them the rooms, they can't get through the door.
Kath, what do you make of that metaphor?
I like it actually, and I don't disagree. My point is simply that without those keys, the rest is inaccessible. But I absolutely recognise English learners need intensive vocabulary and oral language work alongside phonics.
And Damien, does that line up with your classroom experience?
Yes, in fact, when I've taught multilingual classes, I've noticed phonics alone doesn't stick unless there's rich context. For example, if a child learns the sound shh but never hears it in authentic, meaningful conversation or stories, it just remains abstract. When they meet it in a funny story or in context, suddenly it makes sense.
So is the disagreement really about emphasis rather than principle? Because I hear you're all saying phonics is necessary, but maybe the question is necessary but not sufficient.
That's fair.
Let me ask you this then. If you could design tomorrow's national reading curriculum with ESOL learners in mind, what would it look like?
I'd start with systematic daily phonics for all, because English learners benefit just as much as monolingual learners from knowing the code. But I'd embed it in a programme that also explicitly builds oral vocabulary.
I'd ensure there's daily exposure to rich, meaningful texts, picture books, songs, stories, not just word lists. And I'd make space for children's own languages, letting them use their home literacy knowledge to connect to English.
I'd combine both of those, but also insist on structured oral language activities. Children need talk, and lots of it. Paired reading, role play, discussion circles, anything that builds fluency in listening and speaking, because comprehension grows out of language.
This is fascinating, because what I hear is less of a war and more of a call for integration, a kind of literacy ecology that includes phonics, meaning, and oral language.
Yes. I sometimes think of the reading wars as a false dichotomy. It's not phonics or meaning. For English learners, it must be phonics and meaning, together with lots of speaking practice.
So that feels like a great place to pause. We've heard strong arguments for systematic phonics, for balanced literacy, and for an integrated approach that foregrounds the needs of ESOL learners. If nothing else, today's discussion shows that this is not simple either. It's not a simple either or question. Teaching children to read is complex, and maybe these wars, the wars themselves, are less helpful than nuanced solutions teachers create every day in the classrooms. Thank you, Kath, Damien, and Val, for such a rich and thoughtful debate.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk picture books, perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
And so that brings us to the end of the show. Thanks for listening, everyone, and special thanks to my guests. I should reveal, in case you haven't figured it out, that the voices of all three guests were AI generated. All of their words were scripted to represent the main point of views of the reading wars, and then I used text-to-speech to generate the audio. Remember, there are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on a diverse range of subjects. That's all from me until the next time. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.